The girl was washing her face when she noticed an unsightly pimple on her face. She wanted to squeeze it out, but found that the pimple was growing rapidly and her whole face was festering. She hurriedly smashed the mirror, and her face instantly recovered. It turned out that the scene was a hallucination caused by her lack of sleep for 7 days. Jane is a student with excellent grades, but due to poor family conditions, she is eager to earn money to support her family and submits a withdrawal application to the school. The teacher thought it was a pity, so he introduced her to a laboratory for medicine experiments. Each experiment is rewarded handsomely. The experiment she briefly participated in was very simple. Doctors would implant a chip in her neck to extract a substance called keratosu, which is only secreted when humans are awake. During the whole experiment, Jane could not sleep. The doctor put a watch on her that would show the progress of the keratosu extraction. As long as the extraction is complete, Jane can take out the chip and get paid. The first phase of the experiment lasted for 3 days, and the reward was as high as 100,000 yuan. When the chip was implanted, doctors told that the experiment was risky. If she fell asleep in the middle of the experiment, it could cause the chip to malfunction. If her don't wake up within a minute, she'll in danger of dying. Jane is very confident because she usually studies all night, and not sleeping for 3 days is a piece of cake for her. Don't think she's the only one participating in this experiment. On the second day, a boy named Win approached her and showed the same experimental test watch. He was also introduced by teacher. Not only the both of them participated in the experiment, but also the internet celebrity beauty Ruth. Because the pressure of study is too much, she usually only relies on sleeping pills to fall asleep. And Gru, who likes to play games all night. Everyone has been experimenting since yesterday. However, Gru was very concerned about the doctor's instructions, for fear that he would fall asleep accidentally and die directly in a dream. They decided to supervise each other. There are 2 days and nights left in the experiment. The second overnight, everyone was still able to do it well. Ruth stayed up all night live chatting with her fans, Gru stayed up all night playing games, Jane stayed up all night reviewing her homework, and one went to a nightclub for a night of fun. On the third day, everyone's watches showed that the extraction was complete and they got paid as expected. Jane used the money to pay off her delinquent mortgage and went to the mall to buy a lot of things. Gru bought new gaming gear, Ruth went to a high-end spa, and Win bought himself a designer dress. They tasted the sweetness of easy money and discussed continuing the next phase of the experiment. After all, there are still many things they want to buy. They simply set up the sleepless gang and continue the experiment together. The second stage required a higher concentration of keratosu. The experiment lasted for 5 days, and the reward rose to 500,000 yuan. Hearing this amount, everyone could no longer think about the difficulty of the experiment and all thought about how to squander it. This experiment was more difficult than expected. On the third day of the experiment, Gru was already drowsy and accidentally fell asleep directly on the table. Fortunately, the watch detects the sleep state and sounds the alarm, and Gru wakes up within a minute, but half the time of the experiment has passed, and he has only extracted a third of his keratosis. On the other hand, Win's situation is not very good. On the basketball court, his vision was a little blurry, he couldn't concentrate at all. The shouts from teammates also fell on deaf ears. Suddenly, a ball hit Win's head, and he fainted to the ground. Fortunately, he was still awake, but the sound of broken thoughts kept coming from his ears. Strangely, the sound was only audible to him. It seems that he has developed symptoms of auditory hallucinations. Jane stays up late for days on end to review. The lack of sleep makes her restless and has problems with forgetfulness. Anxiety makes her, who has always been gentle, become irritable. Getting her sister's hair on the comb would also make her angry, and she was even shocked when she saw the corpse as a grandmother in pathology class. The experiment has been carried out to the 4th day, and everyone's extraction progress has not exceeded half. If this continues, 500,000 yuan may be lost. Jane noticed that Wynn's progress was the fastest, and she guessed that this should be related to Wynn's liking for sports. In order to keep themselves awake, people even use beeswax to remove hair and eat raw lemons, but the progress is still not obvious. Wynn had to take out his secret weapon, the stimulant he stole from the medical school, drink this to stay excited all night long. Although they were worried about the physical effects of doing, they couldn't care less when they thought of 500,000 yuan. Drank down the specially blended beverages and started the second half of the night carnival. Under the effect of the medicine, everyone's eyes were vacant. Dancing to the music, everyone's progress has increased a lot after one night. Seeing that they were about to complete the task, the accident suddenly happened. Ruth wants to go to the bathroom, but she mistakenly breaks into Gru's room, where she finds out that Gru is her own maniacal fan. The room is showing Ruth's live video, and the walls are covered with pictures from her life. The stimulated Ruth fainted at once. When they heard the alarm sound of the watch, everyone realized that Ruth was unconscious. No matter how you called her, she just didn't want to wake up. The 1-minute countdown is about to end. Jane struck her heart frantically. In time for the last second, Ruth came to her senses. Although everyone completed the task in this experiment, they all reached the physiological limit. Even if the pay for the next stage is 1 million, they are determined to withdraw from the experiment. When they got home, they fell asleep and supplemented their sleep. Everyone thought that the experiment was over. A few days later, Jane's grandmother suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized, and the medical cost of the operation was not cheap. When there was nothing to do, Sister Anna suddenly took out a bag of money to help the family. Seeing the Wilma Lab written on the envelope, Jane immediately realized that Anna was also involved in the sleep experiment. Recalling the dangers of the experiment, Jane angrily blames Anna and warns her not to participate in the experiment again. But the next day, when she returned from the hospital, Anna had disappeared. She immediately rushes towards the lab and finds Anna lying in the surgical chair receiving the chip implant. Jane threatened to call the police to make doctor remove the chip, but Anna had long since signed the preoperative consent form. The next moment, the doctor threatens Jane if she doesn't bring her friend back to continue the third phase of the experiment. He would not help Anna remove the chip. For Anna's sake, Jane had to bring everyone back together and tell them what happened. Although everyone knew that not sleeping for 7 days was literally hovering over the line of life and death, with the friendship of the sleepless gang, they still decided to help. To stay awake for 7 days, they found help from the class teacher to inject drugs that would keep them awake. For safety reasons, they stayed in the school's medical room for the 7 days. Relying on medication, they soon made it to the 6th day, with only the last night left. But this night, accidents happened frequently. Because the physiology had reached its limit, Jane had hallucinated. She found a pool of blood behind the screen, and when she pushed it away, it turned out that Anna fell to the ground, bleeding profusely. Jane hurriedly hugged Anna to check the injury. Then, Anna suddenly appeared behind her, and when she looked back, she realized that there was nothing on the ground. In order to stay awake, Ruth went to the bathroom to wash her face and found a pimple on her face. Soon, the whole face was ulcerated and disfigured. The beauty-loving Ruth was terrified and broke the mirror directly to it. Turned out to be just an illusion, and Wynn, who had been exercising, also had hallucinations. He saw the door of the medical room being pushed open, and his mother, who had been dead for many years, suddenly appeared and called his name. In a trance, Gru walked to the rooftop, stood on the edge of the roof, and almost fell. The situation was getting worse, and everyone's nerves were on edge as the situation continued to be threatened. Jane noticed that Ruth's face was cut by glass. Just want to go forward to check, but was pushed away by Ruth. She blamed Jane and Anna for everyone's current situation. Their emotions flared up. In order to defend the girl they like, Wynn and Gru fought. Jane had to hurry to find the teacher. She shouted a lot, but there was no response from the walkie-talkie. Jane came to the teacher's office and found that their every move could be seen here. The desk is littered with lab reports and a list of actors to audition. Jane realizes that they have been tricked and the lab doesn't exist. the doctor was an actor, and the teacher who recommended everyone to join the experiment was the real boss behind the scenes. Jane was surprised when the teacher suddenly appeared behind her and reminded her that you know too much. Jane hurried back to the ward to gather with everyone and found that the telephone line had been cut off. The door had been locked from the outside. Jane begged to the walkie-talkie, hoping that the teacher would let them go, but the teacher insisted that they complete the experiment, otherwise she would go in and collect the corpse. On the 7th day of the experiment, everyone became manic and irritable, and when they learned the truth, they smashed all the facilities in the ward in a rage. Wayne was exhausted and collapsed to the ground. As he was dying, he saw his mother come to pick him up. The 60-second countdown was over. Wayne still hadn't woken up. The teacher transported his body out, ready to take out the chip. Just as she turns around, Wayne sits up from the hospital bed and hits her with a stick. It turns out that Wayne is not dead, thanks to a medicine Jane found in the hospital room that puts people in a false state of death. So they teamed up and acted in a play. Facing the students' questioning, the teacher opened a curtain in the ward. A man was lying in the ward. The man's name is Jack. He is the lover who has been guarded by the teacher for 24 years. 24 years ago, Jack experimented with insomnia on himself. Not sleeping for a long time caused him to have hallucinations and jumped directly from the upstairs. Fortunately, he did not die, but fell into a coma and became a vegetative. The teacher has been continuing Jack's research and found that kiritosu can wake up a vegetative state, and it is secreted in large amounts in the brains of people who are sleep deprived. After the first experiment, the teacher found that it did work, but one person's kiritosu was not enough to wake Jack up. So, the teacher made up a lie and kept recommending students to join the experiment, exchanging high compensation for kiritosu. The teacher claimed that she never thought about harming anyone, and she showed her neck. It turned out that she participated in the experiment, and everything she did was to wake up her lover. 1 second she was still pretending to be pitiful, and the next second she suddenly picked up the needle and stabbed Jane. Jane collapsed to the ground in an instant, and everyone rushed to get an electric shock for help, but to no avail. 60 seconds are approaching. Jane still hasn't recovered her heartbeat. The anxious Anna unintentionally punched hard. Jane is awake. The police quickly arrived at the scene and arrested the teacher. The chips on their bodies were also successfully removed. While no one got paid in this experiment, they got something more precious. Ruth decided to give up medicine, which she was not good at, and specialize in communication, which she liked, and would no longer suffer from insomnia due to academic pressure. Wynne also reconciled with his father, so he doesn't have to wander outside all night. Gru finds that making friends in reality also has different fun, and is ready to pursue his favorite goddess. As for Jane and Anna, the stresses of life were shared after they reconciled. Sleepless gang, from supervising each other not to sleep to every night, say good night to each other.